Another thing that's been surprising is the stories that you get from people who never have been a part of the programs as we've thought of them in the past. And that's been one of the most powerful things, right? Because the minute you put something in a book, and it's a well-written book and well-received, you start to get stories of people who are like, oh my God, I read your book and it changed my life. And so the realization that the things that we've been teaching that require people to come together were also teachable in other ways and still able to deeply impact people's lives. I think that was pretty profound for us.
You're listening to Relish This, the Purpose Marketing Podcast. Here's your host, Stu Swineford.
Hey everybody, Stu here. My guest today is David Shurna, and he is the founder, or one of the co-founders, and the CEO of NoBarriers. And NoBarriers is this amazing organization that really helps people of all types kind of live their best lives. They have this process that's just incredible. And he's actually written a book about it that I read that was amazing. And so I really recommend that you take a peek at both NoBarriers and this episode, because there's a lot of good stuff in here. We talked a ton about story building, about how to leverage your materials in a variety of different ways to get great content that you can distribute across a variety of platforms, as well as diversifying your revenue. So I think it's a good episode for everyone. I encourage you to take a listen, and here we go. David, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it. It's fun to have a seasoned podcaster on the show. So I'm excited to get your insights and everything about what you guys are up to at NoBarriers.
Yeah, me as well. I'm excited for a good conversation.
It's kind of fun to be on the receiving end of the podcast scenario every once in a while. I've found it's kind of refreshing to step back into that space on occasion. So I hope we have a good conversation. Yeah,
it is fun having done. We just did our 100th episode of the NoBarriers podcast, and it's definitely fun to be on the flip side and see what our guests are experiencing by coming on other podcasts.
Yeah, for sure. Do you guys do one a month? I noticed, I think it said that you did 12 last year. Is that about your cadence?
No, we do them weekly.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
Cool. I don't know where I saw where my brain went when I saw whatever it was that I saw. So I'm glad.
We moved to a weekly model back over a year ago now. It was definitely COVID inspired. We'd been doing a couple per month, and then just because of the NoBarriers themes around resiliency and hope and optimism in the face of great adversity, the NoBarriers podcast seemed more relevant than ever. So we kept going with a weekly, and we've been doing that ever since.
Wow, that sounds great. And you and Eric are the main hosts of that show. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. And then we have a third host that comes sometimes, Jeff Evans, who is Eric Weimer's longtime, lifelong climbing partner.
Oh, cool. That's a really good group of people to have on the show, asking people fun questions, I bet.
Yeah, it really is. It's been great. It's such a good way to, for us at least, to explore even in greater depth what our mission is all about by having regular conversations with really extraordinary individuals who are going through struggle.
Yeah. I love what you guys are doing over there. And I really like that you have a podcast that kind of fuels that expansion of that mission, or the ability to kind of reach a wider audience.
Yeah. It's been a great way to expand our audience to people all over the globe. As you know, podcasts can be picked up pretty much anywhere. And so it's been a good strategy for doing that. And then also more recently for ongoing content snippets that we are re-releasing to our community, right? So you've got the full podcast, but there's creative things you can do with audio to just release 60-second segments out to our community and continue to engage folks in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I talk a lot on this show and then with clients, particularly those in the nonprofit space, about content creation. It tends to be a real challenge. People, have a hard time kind of wrapping their arms around how content can work in kind of all four phases of life cycle, that the audience engagement life cycle, where it can act as an attraction piece and even helping connect. People kind of feel like they know you a little bit more through podcasts. It feels like it's a little more tangible, as well as bonding and then inspiring people to take further action. So it's really a great source for content that I think a lot of nonprofits should be looking at.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's, in terms of the podcast, at least, it's not too difficult to execute on. There's lots of great, products and services out there, and it's pretty affordable too, right? So it's a really great way to generate great content that in an affordable manner that, just like you said, helps with all those four phases.
Yeah, it's interesting to me how podcasting and just creating, whether it's video content or interview type of stuff, can then be transitioned into other forms of outreach. So, if you do a show, you can look back through that show and see what blog posts can come out of it, or what, little snippets of information can be shared in a variety of different ways.
Yeah. We're just starting these kind of 60 to 90 second No Barriers reflections that are going to be some of our video content from 20 years of work, and some of it will be our audio content as well. And content is king nowadays, so having such incredible archives of content is really important, and having different ways to distribute it. And the nice thing about a podcast is, at least the way we do it, we transcribe it all. So you've already got the full narrative. We're already spending time picking out the most compelling, short clip from the segment that we play at the beginning of the podcast. So we already have to go through and pick out some really compelling clips.
Right.
And so those clips can then be repurposed for distribution across all different kinds of channels.
Yeah, it's great. I think the other thing is, particularly in the nonprofit space, your audiences are really diverse in terms of, it's not just one segment of the population that tends to, get their content a certain way. And so being able to repurpose that, you've already put in the effort to create it the first time, but being able to take that and then kind of syndicate it in a variety of different channels allows you to really reach out to a whole host of different audience types.
Yeah, definitely. And certainly, if you have a guest format like we're doing here, your guests are often going to be the best promoters of each podcast episode. So you're introducing yourself to new audience simply by bringing on new guests. So we're finding it to be a great tool for growing, our No Barriers community around the globe.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell me a little bit more about No Barriers and where you guys are, and a little bit of history and what you're trying to accomplish here in hopefully moving toward a post-pandemic sort of world.
Yeah, well, No Barriers has been around for nearly 20 years. I'm one of the founders. It was co-founded by a guy by the name of Eric Weimer, who we mentioned earlier in our conversation. Eric, many people may recognize his name. He's the first blind man to reach the 7 summits, the highest peak on every continent. Went on to kayak more recently the full length of the Grand Canyon. So he's an adventurer who happens to be blind. He's a public speaker. And he and I started this with a team of folks back 20 years ago. And No Barriers is really about helping people who have challenges, and that's all of us, to think of adversity in a new way as the fuel that can actually propel you forward to be your best self. And so at No Barriers, what we're doing is we're helping people tap into the light inside of us that knows anything's possible despite what's in our way. Our tagline kind of sums it up. We're teaching people that what's within you is stronger than what's in your way. And we do it with all different kinds of programs, both in person, virtual, stories, books, movies, all different ways of bringing that message to life. And it's a fascinating way to kind of inspire and move people. And it's not tied to any one specific population. So we work with veterans with disabilities, but we work with kids, we work with teachers, companies. It's really a universal message that all of us, as we go through life, are going to encounter some great adversity. All of us crave purpose and meaning in life, and we operate at this interesting intersection between our kind of quest for purpose and meaning in life and the realization that living that life, you often get derailed and things don't go the way you plan. And how do you get through that? So that's No Barriers in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's such a great mission. I personally have done, a few things that would, I think, go into the category of putting intentional hardship or barriers in front of myself. And we joke in the skiing world that if you're not falling down every once in a while, you're not going hard enough. And certainly one of the things that I decided just kind of on a whim to do back in my late 30s was to try and run the Leadville 100. And the first year that I tried it, I had no idea what I was doing, and I didn't end up finishing. And it just sort of haunted me for the next 3 years. And I finally went back and finished it. But just taking on that challenge and all of the commitment that was required to get that done, and then finally succeeding, it really changed the way that I looked at life, I guess, in a lot of ways. And it's great to hear how you and your crew are helping people with that same sort of mindset, or that same sort of adventure.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfect example of that idea of when we push ourselves to stretch beyond our comfort zone and try something new, that we often, it's the most fertile learning space for learning about ourselves and the world around us. One of our No Barriers board members and someone who's been really moved by our work is a woman by the name of Mandy Harvey, who some of your listeners may know. Mandy was a finalist on America's Got Talent.
Mm-hmm.
She's a deaf jazz vocalist, completely deaf. And she learned as she was studying music before she was deaf, when she was in college, she learned that she had this rare condition that was going to cause her to go deaf. And she gave up on music for quite a while and went into a dark and depressed space, but then decided with her father, maybe I should try singing again a little bit, and found that she still had perfect pitch. And I'm telling this story because Mandy's sort of a classic example of someone who an unexpected adversity hit her hard. And we then celebrate her story of rising to America's Got Talent, where her performance was seen by 500 million people on the planet. But really, Mandy's story is about a series of much smaller steps outside of her comfort zone. The first one being to actually sing it again to her father. The next one being to sing in front of a few people, then in front of a few more people, then to write her first song, which No Barriers inspired her to do, and then to write her own music. And now she's a jazz, superstar by many accounts, with her own career in music. And I think that the process of just taking small and manageable steps. It's not always the Leadville 100 or trying to be on America's Got Talent. It's like, hey, what's something that scares me a little bit, that feels like something I kind of want to do, but I'm afraid of? The minute you step into that space, you end up learning an incredible amount about yourself, and you grow tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just a really great sentiment for I think all of us to wrap our arms around. And the other piece of it is that most things you don't have to do all at once. And so if you can just, chop it up into little bite-sized bits, it tends to be able to, you tend to make progress toward that bigger goal. So it sounds like, Mandy took a bunch of little steps to get to some really big achievements.
Yeah. We're one thing we we probably all know about ourselves, and we certainly see this at No Barriers, is we're actually really bad at setting manageable goals for ourselves. This is why, 90% estimated people who take a New Year's resolution never fulfill it.
Right.
What we tend to do is we set these crazy things that are going to be very hard to attain, and don't realize that you have to start small. Now at No Barriers, we also teach you have to have a broader vision, much bigger than yourself and much longer term, but that each individual step needs to be small and manageable. Or, like we feature in our book, What's Within You, the idea of Taoism, which is, a journey of 1,000 miles is a single step. You've got to have that starting point. And for someone like Mandy, it was a bunch of trial and error. Some things she failed at, some things she succeeded in. But eventually over time, it evolved into this, epic story. And, the story of our co-founder, Eric Weimer, is pretty similar. Obviously he didn't start off as this amazing individual who could just go climb Everest despite not being able to see. It started off with much smaller steps. And so getting better and better at that process can help us feel more successful and keep our momentum going forward.
Right. Yeah, it's really valuable lessons that I think that those of us who run organizations or are engaged in some big plan, it's good to keep track of that because on a day-to-day basis it can feel a little overwhelming at times, no matter what journey you're on. But just kind of making sure that you have that North Star and that you're tracking toward it, I think is it's really super valuable.
Yeah, I think that where some of our folks that we serve, and we work with tens of thousands of people every year, and now in COVID times have millions of people watching videos and stuff that we produce. But I think what we find is that some people get their specific goal confused with their North Star, right? So for someone like Eric, the North Star was not to become the first guy that climbed Everest. For someone like Mandy, it was not to get to the America's Got Talent. Or for you, it probably isn't, Leadville 100. The individual goals like that, no matter how big and bold, are just that. They're goals, and that we need to tie our goals first and foremost to something that we have to spend a lot more time on, which is, what is our North Star? What is our vision for ourselves and our role in the world and the impact we're going to have? And how do we put that down on paper? And how do we start to align every aspect of our life towards that vision, that broader vision for who we want to be in this world?
Right. Are those components of the programs that you run at No Barriers? Is that a part of it, is helping people kind of figure that out?
Yeah. You can't see me here on this podcast, obviously, but I'm sitting in my office, which I'm thankful to be back at after a long period away due to COVID. But there's 7 principles on my wall here in my office that we teach, and we're really hovering around 2 of them. The first one being vision, which is this idea of, just like you said, that North Star, and how do you define it? How do you redefine it? Especially in the midst of challenge and adversity, how do you rediscover what your vision really is? Right. And then the second one we call reach, which is about reaching into the unknown and the darkness outside your comfort zone. And so throughout our programs, no matter how you're engaging with us, whether it's an online course or reading our book or coming in person, you're learning these principles that we have studied over 20 years that great and extraordinary leaders use to get through adversity.
Oh, that's really cool that that's just baked into to everything you guys do. I love it. So in terms of your program, are you funded by donations? What's the mechanism by which you're able to do all this great work with people?
Yeah, well, there's sort of the pre-COVID story, and then there's the post-COVID story. So a year and a half ago, I would have said that we are funded 60% by donations and 40% by fee-for-service revenue. And of the donations, roughly half of our donations come from corporate partners, either through their foundations or their marketing departments, and the other half comes from individual donors. The 40% that was fee-for-service was largely people paying to come in person to some of our programs, primarily our youth programs that used to be in 20 different countries around the world, where you would travel to different places. And so post-COVID, all that fee-for-service revenue that used to be tied to coming together in person has for the most part dried up. And so, now I would say we're nearly 100% funded by donations, and those donations are split between companies, individuals, and some foundation support.
Gotcha. Have you learned any tricks over the last few months to help fuel the donor engagement? Was it kind of normal from 19 to 20, or was it how did it go?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you mean since COVID hit?
Yeah. Since you've started relying pretty much primarily on donations and foundation support and corporate.
Yeah,
support.
I mean, I think that like for us, in the foundation and corporate sponsorship world, we've always known it's all about good relationships. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you have to deliver on the promise of what you're negotiating and have a really good story to back it up. But to us, maintaining those relationships with donors has always been really important. And so when COVID struck and we had to cancel all of our in-person programming for over a year, having that important foundation of the relationships we already had built was one thing. And then second, continuing to tell the story of how you're impacting lives. Because if you think about No Barriers for 17 years, all people really knew about us was about our in-person experience. And so for us, we had to make sure that we showed our donors, primarily through the power of story, that despite the fact that they knew us as this in-person experiential program, that we were still doing extraordinary things in the virtual world.
Right. That's great. What mechanisms do you use to stay in touch? Is it primarily just email list, or are you hosting virtual events? Or what's been working well for you?
Yeah, it's a mix, right? So we have our social channels, and for us, those are primarily Facebook and Instagram. That's where we have our biggest communities. We haven't ventured out into the world of TikTok yet, and other of the most up and coming ones. But so we have our social channels where we're engaging with folks. We have our email lists, and then we developed a membership community for our alumni and our donors that they could join and start to participate in what started in COVID times as weekly events, and then moved to every other week. And then as we had some fatigue from Zoom fatigue, moved to more like as we had really compelling things to invite people into. And so for us, there were a lot of ways we were, trying to keep folks engaged. And I would say, other than the email lists and the social stuff, which we've been doing forever, it was really sort of exploring this new world of membership-based weekly events, courses you could take together in a community, kind of like a book club.
Okay.
Those are some of the newer things we are exploring.
Oh, that's really interesting. Tell me a little bit about the courses that you put on kind of in this virtual space.
Yeah, well, I think we had a bit of an advantage now with what we're seeing with kind of Zoom fatigue, because we went into it saying, geez, for 17 years, all we've ever done is, for the most part, in-person experiences. So if we're going to go into this virtual space, how do we take the beauty and magic of those in-person experiences and try to create them into an online course experience? We had about 5 years ago had some companies invest in the development of an online course experience that brought people through our 7 life elements at their companies. So we had some experience in how do you teach the principles online. But our first focus was how do you make this be something that's experiential, interactive with other people, and that isn't just sitting on a computer. And so what we did is, I would say some of the most interesting things we did is we started with the idea of a physical course kit that when you enroll in our course gets mailed to you and has unexpected surprises in it. It has sort of release points that's like, do not open this until such and such date. Right. And then when you open it, you get your assignment or your adventure, or as we call it, your No Barriers mission. We, in our more intense courses like what we did for veterans at home last fall, tied to Veterans Day, you would get these missions and you'd be put into what we called rope teams, which is in keeping with a philosophy we teach. And you'd have a team of 6 or 7 members, fellow veterans, who were doing their mission together. They do it on their own, but then they'd come together once a week and share it. And then we had professional facilitators facilitating discussion with those veterans. And so we combined sort of like, yes, you could come and attend an event and hear Dave and Stu speak about something brilliant and ask them questions, which is pretty common in the Zoom world today, with these at-home kits and small breakout groups. And kind of what we're finding is that people still really crave the small, honest discussions about tough things, but it's got to be, just like I said, it's got to be small. So that's like 5 to 8 people in our minds, right? Yeah. And although you can deliver short bits of content to a bigger group, like where we could wax eloquently about the philosophy for 5 minutes, what people really want is to break up and actually talk to each other in honest conversation.
Right. Yeah, that's what I found with, in the entrepreneurial space. There are a number of kind of organizations like EO or Vistage or YPO that have that kind of a model where there's a big group, but that group is split into smaller groups. And those smaller groups, you're able to build a lot of trust and be able to come in and feel, very confident that you can share, whatever is going on, good or bad in your life, and get that kind of support that's really, all of us crave and all of us need. Most of the time I think that we feel like we're islands, right? Where it's like, oh, well, this is the first time that this has ever happened to anybody, and woe is me. And if you can have a real trusted, tight knit group like that you can pretty quickly understand that, nope, everybody else has gone through a similar challenge, or at least, something that's analogous to that. So that's a really, really cool way to do that. Are you doing that through like breakout rooms in Zoom, or is it more formal as you build those groups to kind of get it together?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, when we launch, say, a course, like let's say a month-long course, it's a combination of things. So we use a course platform called Thinkific, and that is for where you can have virtual discussion groups, not live, but more like little group discussions that you can type into. You can consume your static content, a video. You can grab your mission from there if you didn't receive it in a kit. And then we combine that with Zoom breakout groups primarily. We did a similar thing with without Zoom breakout groups. It was for more of our big conference-based experience, which we call our NoBarriers Summit, where we still had that same philosophy as how do you create community engagement. And we used a platform called Hopin for that, which we found to be pretty effective as well.
Nice. Yeah, those are great shares. I know that there are a lot of people out there struggling with what tools to use, and so it's always good to get other options for people. And the second one was Hopin. Is that what you said?
Yeah, HOPIN.
Nice. So that was for the big group.
And that was more like we host an annual conference. So that one had, 5,000 registrants, 1.3 million views of different aspects of, our keynote speakers and such. But what we liked about Hopin and what we continue to look for is platforms that allow people to both view and consume content, but interact with each other. Right.
Right.
And so Zoom is great. We find for that smaller group, we've done it for, up to a couple hundred where you still break out into groups. But, when you're talking about 5,000 people or 10,000 people or, 1 million people live streaming, we have found it to be less effective for that.
Right. Gotcha. So in terms of 2021, are things changing for you guys? Are you seeing things open back up where you can start to hold in-person events again, or what do the next few months look like?
Yeah, so we decided to open up in-person programming for our 16 and over
Okay.
populations back in the fall and early in January. We were meeting with various organizations that, Outward Bound, Knowles, National Outdoor Leadership School, several smaller organizations, just all talking about like what are people planning to do. And for us and the things we were considering, we felt we could be pretty confident back in January that adult programming would be feeling good and safe. We thought vaccines would be widely distributed to the adult population by then. We felt a little bit more gun shy about our student programs. And so what we decided to do is starting in July, we'll be hosting many of our adult programs, not, certainly a scale back. So we'll be hosting our veterans expeditions and retreats, our caregiver retreats. We're hosting a much smaller in-person version of our conference. It's an outdoor conference though. And we're eliminating the indoor parts of it. So that'll probably be 300 or 400 people instead of 5,000.
Right.
So we did have to make some pivots. Our big annual event that we had been planning to do in San Francisco was going to be in the Giants Stadium.
Oh, wow.
And we decided that probably wasn't a great idea
Right.
for a variety of reasons. And so, we moved that to Colorado, a basin, outdoor, smaller community. So that's a little bit of our decision-making process. We hope that all of our youth programs will come back into full force by next year, but didn't feel confident in this year bringing together in person for kids.
Yeah, it's just been super fluid. I mean, I remember this time last year, people were pretty excited about that we'd be able to be back to fairly normal by October, and clearly that didn't quite pan out. But I think that having some hope and continuing to do some planning around these things and is probably the way that most nonprofits should start to handle it. I know I'm on the board of a couple of nonprofits, and one is planning a kind of a half and half virtual and in-person event in late September. So that the idea there is that by then we have enough vaccination compliance that we can get groups of people back together again.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way we went with our big event, which is at the end of August. It's going to be part in person but virtual. So one of the benefits to us of what happened last year is when you kind of strip away all the energy and team members that are dedicated to the in-person, you're left with, okay, well, what's left? And for NoBarriers, we thankfully have this whole philosophy we teach that we always said we wanted to be a global organization and had individual global participants from various things like our podcast or our summit. But when you kind of take away all that in-person work and you say, gosh, how might we impact people's lives? We have had incredible scale in our impact this year. So, we released, we fast-tracked a book about our philosophy that we weren't, didn't know we were going to release last year, but we thought it'd be a great time to do it. So we did that. It became a bestseller.
Oh, that's awesome.
We never had done virtual conferences, and we had, instead of having a few thousand people come in person to a conference, we had over 1 million people pay attention to it through live stream. We had tens of thousands of people engage in it. So what we found is, how are we going to, as we move forward into this hybrid approach, how do we still lean into the things that really worked for us and help us achieve scale? Another thing we did was we'd always talked about being bilingual. So sometime in the next week or two here, all of our stuff is going to come out in Spanish and in English now. And that was something we could totally control in times of COVID, right? Like, why not? We've got energy to put there. Let's make it bilingual. And now our curriculum will be bilingual in schools, and our conference is going to be bilingual. So there's been some good parts for us to kind of lean into that aspirational goal of reaching exponentially more people. But of course, we're excited to have those deeply kind of intimate, transformative in-person things come back as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me a little bit about the book. I'm excited to see that you put a book out. How's that working for you? I mean, it sounds like it's working really well if it's a bestseller.
Yeah. So we, the board president, Tom Lillig, and I, had been talking about this with the board for a while pre-COVID, and we decided to go for it. We wrote this book. It's called What's Within You, Your Roadmap to Living Life with No Barriers. And you can grab it on Amazon or any number of places where you buy books. Mm-hmm. But what we decided to do, and this was, thankfully that it had been something we'd been talking about before COVID, was, how do we put the principles that we teach in our in-person programs into a book that's part how-to, part philosophy of, and part research-based. So it goes through the 7 principles that we teach, and it starts really with powerful stories of how these principles have transformed people's lives. But then it, a lot of what we teach at No Barriers about how you overcome adversity goes back to ancient philosophies of how to live life. And so it teases out sort of the philosophy of the approach. Mm-hmm. And then it's practical too. It's kind of like we envision this book being a tattered book that you go back to and you say, oh yeah, I need that reminder. How might I go about and become a better, alchemist, as we call it, someone who's more optimistic in the face of adversity? What are those principles that No Barriers teaches? Yeah. So it was exciting and fast paced to put it together, and came out with it back in last summer. And like I said, it became an Amazon bestseller. And now we're continuing to use that. As books can be a great way to get you into new partnerships. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like it's a great business card, and it's really, we got some incredible advocates behind the book, and that whole process of learning how to launch a book was really exciting. Thankfully, we had people from our community, like Eric Weimer has written many best-selling books. Right. Mandy Harvey had a best-selling book. J.R. Martinez, one of our ambassadors, had a best-selling book. So we had a lot of people helping us.
Oh, that's great. It's always good to have a team behind you that's gone down that path before. What were some of the things that you found that were like unexpected in terms of once you rolled the book out? Were there any surprises that you were like, oh wow, I never anticipated that happening?
Well, I wanted it to become a bestseller, but it was surprising. I didn't, I wasn't like, oh my gosh, this is going to happen. So that was surprising. Another thing that's been surprising is the stories that you get from people who never have been a part of the programs as we've thought of them in the past. Mm-hmm. And that's been one of the most powerful things, right? Because the minute you put something in a book, and it's a well-written book and well-received, you start to get stories of people who are like, oh my God, I read your book and it changed my life. And so the realization that the things that we've been teaching that require people to come together, mm-hmm. were also teachable in other ways and still able to deeply impact people's lives. I think that was pretty profound for us. So, we just a side story. We had someone in India, actually, a teacher in India, read our book recently, and then he wrote me this, beautiful note about what it had meant to him, and requested that he could take the course tied to the book for free because he came from a poorer community. Mm-hmm. And then he said, I want to bring this to all of my students. And he has a school that brings kids from all over India that are in college to study leadership. And so we did a live presentation to those kids. It was very moving. They've read the book. Now they're going to take our course. And so these are the kinds of things that without the book, you would never have happen, right? Mm-hmm. You start to reach folks that you never knew. Well, you knew they were out there, but they didn't really have a way to engage with you. Mm-hmm. So it opened, new doors in that sense as well.
Yeah, I think that we all tend to think of the internet or our website or our social media platforms as the way that we're going to achieve that scale. And a lot of times it's just good old fashioned book writing or creating a something that you can share that people can kind of wrap their arms around and dig into, can be, what really fuels that growth.
For sure. Yeah. And even, you asked what else was surprising, like, one of the pieces of advice as you're getting your book together is to get, people to pre-read it, mm-hmm. and give you testimonials and just kind of like the number of, quasi-celebrity people who actually read our book and said good things about it. Like on the cover of the book is Dr. Jane Goodall, a quote from her about this being an incredibly inspiring book about people that illustrate the indomitable human spirit. You get these quotes from people like, wow, Dr. Jane Goodall read my book and actually had something really good to say about it. And then, of course, that, opens doors to new communities that you can reach.
Yeah, I think the other thing, and this is something from a marketing standpoint, when we start talking about or recommending that our clients consider writing a book, is it just is a validation tool. And even if people haven't read it, they see, oh, well, this guy wrote a book, so David must know what he's talking about.
100%. Yeah, I mean, it's a great credentializer. So it gives you those street cred. It makes people feel that you're legitimate. I think that's really true. It also opens up, and like if it has any level of success, like we're able to say ours is an Amazon bestseller, like then people are interested in having you come and speak in ways that are, gives you this window of having a platform then to go out and tell more people about your mission. Our book, 100% of proceeds goes to the nonprofit. So it created a smaller, but new revenue stream for people hiring us to speak, and also just a way to reach new people and a reason for them to say, oh my gosh, this is relevant and new and we need this now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really great. I'm happy to hear that that's the experience that you guys had. I mean, certainly, people are always looking for good people to bring in to speak to their conferences and things of that nature. And so I'm sure having a book, particularly a bestseller, under your wing, is helpful there.
Yeah, for sure.
What's new for you guys, or what's coming up? Where are you looking for? I'm assuming you have a big master plan just based upon your seven tenet approach. What's the big picture look like for you here in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, well, we certainly try to practice what we preach. So we have our big, hairy, audacious goal, which we set 4 years back, that's supposed to be accomplished sometime in the next 10 to 20 years. And, without getting into the details of all of it, the basic idea is that we, over the next 5 to 10 years, really want to be known as the most reputable source globally for learning to break through barriers and harness them to achieve your purpose. So that's the big, bold goal. Obviously, it's broken down into achievable chunks, just like we teach, and it's broken down into more practical language that would let us know when we're getting towards that.
Right.
But we're definitely sort of aspiring to lean into this thing that we created, 20 years ago, that was largely based on, tens of thousands of people coming together in person to have these experiences and saying, well, no, let's be that global organization that is widely known as the organization that teaches you best how to break through the challenges you face and be your best self in spite of those challenges.
What do you think the challenges are to reaching that goal?
Oh, there's lots of them, right? Of course, like there's, you've got competitors, lots of competition in the space. Mm-hmm. You could say we're in the self-help space. There's a lot of people in that space. So that's certainly one. For us, holding true to the global aspiration, but also the kind of the close human thread that ties it all together. Right. Because for us, you could, if you have the right amount of money, you could probably pay to have, as many views as you wanted of whatever it is you want to have viewed, but that doesn't really mean that you're transforming lives. And so One of the things we talk about a lot is this balance, or as we call it, it's sort of the polarity between scale and depth. And for us, walking that line of knowing that, hey, even when we can say we have that scale, what really matters to us is that we have a deep impact on the people who really engage with us. Right. And so kind of holding that true and not being too swayed by, just shouting high in the mountaintop the big numbers of people reached, but really, Eric and I and our board say, hey, we could, even if we reached 7 billion people and we could say that, what really matters to us is that we can truly still say that we're changing people's lives through this work. And so how do you scale while still having that depth is certainly a challenge. And then, of course, like any business, money is a challenge, right? Like, how do you figure out the revenue drivers that will help you scale and grow and have that deep impact? Those are some of the things that come to mind for those challenges that I see.
Yeah, it's really interesting to kind of think through all of those hurdles and how to navigate them, and particularly as you're scaling, with such a hands-on, personalized sort of model. How do you achieve that scale and still give people those that rich, fulfilling experience that is going to change a life? And I can imagine that you're working on that as well.
Yeah. I mean, some of the interesting things that we're working on now is to acknowledge that part of the desire, part of that global vision is really about how do you market yourselves and how do you grow awareness and kind of that top of funnel approach, right? So we've got to have the dollars to do that, and we've got to have the vision to do that and to tell that story well. But at the same time, just as we were talking about with sort of Zoom and best practices of small groups, like really when you think about how you build community, you don't build it by the millions, right? You build it by the handfuls. And so some of the interesting work we're doing right now is how do we build these small communities of individuals, even if they're only 5, 10, 50, 100 people, that are really kind of the lifeblood of that human thread that ties it all together. And what are those communities doing? How do you keep them engaged in meaningful work? How do you connect them with each other? So that's some of the really interesting work we're doing. We just brought on as our new head of marketing someone who'd been on our board, this guy by the name of Luis Gallardo, who used to be the global CMO for Deloitte.
Oh, cool.
And he had developed a nonprofit called the Happiness Fest. And one of their models was to have these groups, they call them agoras, that are 5 to 10 people in 80 cities. And they're really the brand advocates, and they're doing a lot of the volunteer work to make your mission grow. Right. And even though that total number of people might only be 1,000, what they do for you is incredible. And so how do we take our thousands, because we got more than 1,000, and really activate them to be sort of this force that helps drive the growth and the depth of impact? That's some of the interesting work we're exploring right now.
Yeah, that's what we call the inspire phase of that life cycle, where you have these people, they've bought into what you're doing. They're excited about what you're doing, and just making sure that you don't lose track of them, because they can really amplify that message and spread it much farther than even an ad spend can do, because it's an authentic champion for your organization.
Yeah, and, so true.
And so really keeping those people engaged and leveraging opportunities to help them with that messaging, to help them spread that word. That tends to be kind of some of that magic potion that you can drizzle over the top of this, that makes it really go far and wide.
Yeah. We've had for many years now, we've had our brand ambassadors that for years, those brand ambassadors, like part of their criteria as we looked for them was that they had a large social following and an engaged social following. So you think of, someone like Eric who, can reach 100,000 people with a single post, or Whitney Way Thor, who has a program on TLC called My Big Fat Fabulous Life, who can, in theory, reach 1 million people with a single post based on her size of following. The truth is that, though those people add a lot of value to our conversation, that what we're expanding to in terms of our brand ambassadors are the people who can really engage, 100 people, as opposed to just the celebrity status. Because sometimes those very celebrities, and Mandy Harvey and Eric and Whitney and JR will tell you this, they're disenchanted with their own audience's response rate, right? Like, you follow a celebrity doesn't necessarily mean you're going to engage with them. And so having a combination of that celebrity brand ambassador, but plus those really dedicated brand advocates who've had a life transforming experience. We're expanding kind of that ambassador program to include more of those folks too, because they can really engage with 100 people or 10 people, and that matters.
Yeah, it's that personal one-on-one relationship building that's just the key to marketing. We talk a lot about how marketing is, that's all it is. It's just relationship building. And whether you're building a very quick relationship with, buy this thing that you need, or one that requires a lot more trust and a lot more nurturing to develop. It's all about making sure you're telling authentic stories and really bringing value to everybody out there, as opposed to just, shouting a message from the mountaintop.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, that's very much our philosophy as well.
Yeah, it's really cool to hear how you're engaging kind of, we'll just call them influencers on all levels, because I think there are a lot of people who are really good at talking to a ton of people at once. And then there are some people who are just experts at having these, very close, intimate conversations that are incredibly inspirational, and they might not do so well on a big stage, and vice versa.
Very true.
Yeah, it's really cool. I love what you guys are doing. I'm really excited to follow your journey and see what's next, as you kind of try and tackle this big, hairy, audacious goal that you have to.
Yeah, me too. I'm excited about it too. Yeah, I mean, I think another place, as you kind of think about nonprofits, that I think it's under utilized, or at least sort of this exploratory phase that we've been in for many years now, which is how do you find corporate audiences that resonate with your mission and then are willing to tell the stories that you produce to their customer base. So that's a really great opportunity. I think that gets overlooked. I mean, certainly we have a sort of a brand and a mission that allows for that, but we've seen amazing exposure for the organization through partners like Wells Fargo or CoBank or Allstate or Airbnb, these big partners who have a global audience that when they're telling the story to that audience, you get exposure there as well. Yeah. So this has been something we've been honing and getting better and better at over the past 10 years. But it's something I think that everyone should always explore, is where do you, those companies are looking for ways to, one, make a difference, but also show their customers what they care about and connect with their customers. And sometimes your nonprofit mission can be that avenue.
Absolutely. I mean, corporate social responsibility is a huge kind of thing that's going on these days. And I think for the most part, for good. I certainly feel that there's always the opportunity to use it as a greenwashing if you're trying to get into the environmental space or some other kind of PR Band-Aid. But when corporations come at that idea of really engaging with the right nonprofit, so making sure that there's mission alignment, you can do some really amazing things, particularly if there's an audience alignment as well, within the corporate's audience and the audience that the nonprofit's going after. It can be really incredible.
Yeah, it really can be. Yeah, we've seen great success across all of our different corporate initiatives, and also being flexible enough to adapt to mutual goals, right? So if you've got a company that you gotta have some flexibility so that you're able to help them with what they're trying to accomplish while still staying focused enough that you're not diverting resources towards something that isn't mutually aligned.
Yeah, exactly. It's a challenge. I think that's one thing. All of us get pretty excited about the opportunity to work with a big corporate sponsor, but as a nonprofit, taking that time to make sure that it's a good fit, that it's a good match, because there could be potential wasted opportunity there if you hop on the first person that comes knocking on your door without that kind of shared mission or something that aligns what you do with what they're hoping to achieve.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and in our work, whether it's Winnebago or Prudential or Airbnb, Wells Fargo, all these people we work with at the national level, we generally find that first and foremost, you want to be mission aligned, and that part comes pretty quickly. You can tell if you are, but then the companies are either looking to. There's usually some combination of companies that might want employee engagement opportunities, so they may want their employees to volunteer with you. They certainly want to be able to tell good stories to their employees. They want their employees to maybe be engaged at more of a staff level to help craft the marketing message. So we have these companies who really are focused on employee engagement, and then we have companies that also want customer engagement, right? And so those are the companies that are saying, okay, great, we're going to support this. Now, what's the story that we can tell? And I always advise other nonprofits to try to get into the marketing budgets of companies, because that's where there's a lot of dollars and a lot of exposure for you as an organization. Typically, a company that invests a certain amount in us, if they're really invested in the project, is going to put 3 to 10 times as much money into their own marketing budget to leverage whatever they gave to us, right? So they're going to give a certain amount to us to sponsor, but then they're going to spend a lot of their own resources to help tell the story and make it a success. So I want to try to find those partners where that's possible. You're not going to always start there. Sometimes you're going to start in their smaller, foundation budgets, but you want to evolve into that marketing budget.
Oh, that is just really great insight. I hadn't really thought about that, but yeah, if you just have somebody who wants to throw whatever the dollar figure is. So let's just say it's $100,000 or whatever at a nonprofit as a partner, but they aren't willing to back that up with any sort of marketing spend. It probably should start to make you wonder exactly how committed they are to the partnership.
Yeah. Or, I think that it's an educational part. Like some companies are well into this. They're already doing it on their own. And for some other companies, they're, I talked to one this week who was like, oh yeah, we've never really done that direct connection between our CSR and our marketing department, but this seems like a good opportunity. So I think, certainly it's just something to be exploring as you're partnering with companies, that there are big buckets of dollars and talent to help you. If you start to open those marketing doors. And the CSR folks are amazing too, as are the foundation folks. So these are all really good people in our experience in these companies, but just kind of realize there are multiple tracks you can be pursuing as you're building that corporate relationship. And the more you can kind of diversify the different departments you're working at in a company, the longer life that partnership might have.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just a more mature conversation to be having as you're negotiating with a company to come on as their CSR partner.
Exactly.
Yep. I love it. I think that's an amazing insight. I'm happy that you brought that up. Well, I can't believe it's been an hour. I've had such a great time chatting with you today, David. How can people learn more about NoBarriers and maybe take on some opportunities to train with you guys?
Yeah, they can go to NoBarriersUSA.org, and there you can enroll in our programs. You can make a donation. You can explore more about our philosophy and our mission. You can get access to the book, What's Within You, there or on Amazon. But NoBarriersUSA.org.
I will put that in the show notes for sure. I love having these conversations, and I like talking about things, but I also love when people can actually take some action. And whether that's, going outside for a hike or, starting their own nonprofit or whatever that action might be, I always like to end the show with an ask. And that is, if you could have people listening to the show today take one action after listening, what would you have them do?
I would love for you to go by what's within you and follow the principles therein to set a big stretch goal for yourself.
Love it. I'm going to go get a copy right now, actually, and I'm excited to read it. Thanks so much for being on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it as well.
Have a great day.
You too.
All right, there you have it. Another great episode of Relish This. Thanks for listening. If you would like to learn more about how to apply the audience engagement cycle to expand your organization's mission, there are two things you can do. Right now, you can go to missionuncomfortablebook.com to download a copy of my book. And while you're there, you can get your purpose-driven marketing score to see where you can unearth some gold for your organization. If you'd like to listen to back episodes of the show or sign up to be a guest, go to relishstudio.com/podcast. That's it for this week. I'll be back next week for another great episode of Relish This.